of what sort of changes are taking place in the brain when somebody gets dementia, that is huge in terms of informing someone how they're going to just physically approach a person living with dementia, what they're going to say.
Whether you are the person living with dementia or the person caring for the person living with dementia, we're all just doing the best we can moment to moment, and to remember to give ourselves grace.
Welcome back to This Day and Age, where we continue to bring together experts in all things aging, providing vital information to help you and your loved ones make confident decisions while navigating life's journey. And this is Phil Tower, your host for this episode and every episode of This Day and Age. You can check them all out at thisdayandage.org. And you know what? Let's state the obvious. It's important we recognize the significance of Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month. It is November, and that is the recognition, but we really ought to realize the fact that this is something that impacts us every day of every month. That's why in this episode, I'm really pleased that we are joined by two dementia specialists, Lois Thomas and also Rosemary Apol-Hoezee from the Dementia Institute, to talk about the increasing need for not only expert training, a lot of education, and of course support that they provide, and the challenges those living with dementia and those that care for them can experience not only during the holidays, we'll cover that, but really any time of the day or any time of the year. First of all, I appreciate you both being here. Lois, to my left, as we have this conversation, and Rosemary, to my right. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. First of all, I'm going to start with you, Lois Thomas. You are a dementia specialist at the Dementia Institute. And Rosemary, I'd like you to follow up on this. First of all, talk about what your role as a dementia specialist is and a little bit about the Dementia Institute, if you would, please.
Yeah, so thanks for having us. We, as a dementia specialist, we provide training for both our staff, caregivers at Holland Home, and we are expanding to offer classes to the community and providing specialized training as well for groups such as first responders, and we'll be looking to expand that to community churches and parishes, clergy, and that sort of thing.
So training is a big piece of this.
Big
education.
piece of it. Yep. And the Dementia Institute has three pillars. We have education, care that we just talked about, and then research. And maybe Rosemary can talk a little bit more about that. And
I want to ask you this, and then you can start with this, Rosemary. What brought you to the Dementia Institute?
Well,
other than an amazing offer you couldn't turn down.
So I've been with Holland Home for 5 years.
Okay.
I have 3 dementia certifications, and Rosemary and I have been working together on, all of our initiatives for Holland Home that were dementia related. And when our CEO came up with the idea of starting this Dementia Institute, he asked Rosemary and I to join, and I was more than happy to do so.
What an incredible honor.
Yes,
and a responsibility.
so.
There's a lot of work to do.
There is a lot of work to do.
Rosemary, I'd love to hear about your story.
So I've been with Holland Home for about 11 years, and just prior to this role, I was the director of our Quality and Education Department. We cover a lot of different things, and one of them happened to be dementia care, and I kind of fell into this passion, really. We received a grant from the state of Michigan and heard about this person named Teepa Snow, and so we decided to pursue training with her, and it was really kind of career-changing and almost maybe a little bit life-changing as well. So that really became a passion of mine, and yeah, so here I am now with the Dementia Institute.
So I'm hearing you say, without you actually using the words, Teepa lit a fire under you in a big way. And I want our listeners to know we did a full podcast episode with Teepa. You can check it out at thisdayandage.org. It is amazing. And I'm just eager to hear more about that experience, that training, the learning from Teepa. You came away from it very inspired. What made that experience special for you, Rosemary?
Well, Teepa just has an ability to, and you put it well in saying, lighting fires under people. In fact, Lois and I were at her national conference last week in North Carolina, so there were lots of folks there under whom she lit a fire. But she's very practical in terms of how she helps people understand what happens with dementia. And so she takes some fairly complicated concepts about how the brain changes, and she makes it very easy for people to understand, and then also very easy to implement hands-on practice. And it's all about, she'll be quick to say this, and she did this last week as well. She'll be quick to say it's all about the relationship. So it's all about how you relate to that person living with dementia, how you try to create moments of joy for them, even in the midst of a pretty debilitating disease.
Yeah. There's just a lot of insecurity about how to interact, how to ask those words, how to approach. Lois, you're nodding your head.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
People are scared. I think when they encounter someone that they know, family member or not, they're afraid of making the wrong impression, perhaps scaring that person with dementia or Alzheimer's, and really coming away from that experience, unfortunately, maybe not wanting to be around people with Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yes, absolutely. People tend to think one of the first things that they associate with any kind of Alzheimer's or any kind of dementia is that loss of short-term memory. So that tends to make people shy away because they simply don't know how to communicate with them in that moment, and leads to considerable isolation for persons living with dementia. And so that's where having that education is really helpful and key, so they can still communicate, so they can still connect, so they can still have those moments of joy.
That's a good point. I want to go back to training versus education, because you're both dementia specialists and you've received specific training, ongoing training, like you just said, with Teepa Snow and her workshop. What is this training and what is it designed to do? Obviously, I would think it's focused on the person living with Alzheimer's, but let's go a little deeper than that. What does that training entail, at least high level, what you learn as a specialist?
So Teepa's organization offers 7 different certifications, and between Rosemary and I, we hold all of those certifications. And so it's a specialized training, so it's learning not only the skills on how to preserve the relationship, and the relationship means that moment in time for that person living with dementia, because they may not always remember that relationship. So sometimes you're forging a new relationship right here, right now, and in this moment. And so it's also teaching those skills, but it's also learning how to present that material with everyone has different learning needs. I may be a visual learner, whereas you may be an auditory or a hands-on learner. And so we're taught how to present that material to meet all of those different learning needs. So that makes it pretty unique and pretty specialized. You don't seem to get that a lot of other trainings.
Well, we're pretty fortunate to be in the presence of people who have all of those certifications. And I think it's really important. We also established for our listeners in November, Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month, the confusion and the relationship between Alzheimer's disease and also dementia. So, Rosemary, I'll throw that to you. People get these confused, mixed up, sometimes even use the wrong terminology or words. Can you help our listeners understand the relationship between dementia and Alzheimer's disease?
Sure, yeah, and that is a very common area of confusion. So we like to think of dementia as an umbrella. It's basically, defines a number of different symptoms that all are reflective of brain disease, because that's what dementia is. And then underneath that umbrella, we have up to 120 different types. So Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. It happens to be one of the most common and accounts for roughly 65 to 80% of all dementias, but it is one type of dementia, and we know that there are a host of other different types of dementia.
Yeah, I've heard the term Lewy body dementia.
Yep, Lewy body is fairly common. Vascular dementia is also is also quite common, and then there are things that have been relatively newly discovered: chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which often happens when people play a lot of football and get a lot of concussions.
CTE, we've heard.
Exactly, yes.
Right. We've heard a lot about that.
Yeah.
A lot of concern, redesigning football helmets, concern of whether or not my high school student should play football, and on and on. And we're still learning about head trauma, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what happens to the brain inside. I'd like to also talk a little bit about the thing we've covered on so many of these episodes of This Day and Age, which is the growing avalanche, tsunami of aging, an aging population in this country. It certainly impacts this area of Alzheimer's and types of dementia. 1 in 7 adults, or approximately 6.5 million Americans, age 65 plus, are currently living with dementia. I have a family member living with dementia in that group. By 2050, that number is expected to double to 13 million. And just for those who are keeping score at home, it's 2023 as we have this conversation. That's barely 25 years away, and that number doubles. That kind of stops you in your tracks as you realize that. I actually looked at that number, 6.5 million Americans, and I just wonder how many are undiagnosed or early. I mean, do we even know that, Lois?
No, there's unless someone is proactive enough to go to the doctor and not be so concerned about, the stigma or what's going to happen going down the road, but being proactive enough to go to the doctor and, hey, say something's not right here. And that's not a lot of people are comfortable in doing that. And so unfortunately, oftentimes folks aren't diagnosed until even mid-state of the disease.
Is there training that goes along with that fear or that apprehension? I mean, obviously, a lot of this is focused on the person living with Alzheimer's or a type of dementia, but I would think the training needs to start with just having the conversation. Fair enough?
Yes, absolutely. And we do cover in our trainings kind of a what's normal aging, because sometimes people think, well, sometimes I have trouble remembering names, or I'll think of it later on. And so we discuss the normal aging versus not normal aging and what that looks like to help kind of help people navigate when it's time to talk to the doctor.
So, Rosemary, this growing aging population, it's happening to all of us. The boomers are a significant part of this. What does this mean for the ongoing training, education, and care for people living with Alzheimer's and dementia?
Well, I think we certainly notice that there is still a huge stigma about having dementia. In fact, somebody at the conference last week said dementia is where, breast cancer was maybe 30 years ago. In terms of, being able to acknowledge that and to bring it out into the open and discuss it. And acknowledge that, yep, it's a rough disease, but there are ways that we can use to connect with people. There are ways that we can continue to communicate with a good friend of ours, maybe, who's been diagnosed with dementia, and things are different. But we also know that there, again, are ways to connect with that person so that that person isn't left alone.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point you just made. It's something that we almost want to put that person in a box and just say, okay, well, they're over there, and hopefully they'll get the care they need. But you're absolutely right in saying we're having a very difficult time with inclusiveness of people living with Alzheimer's. I have two people rapidly nodding their heads in here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a struggle to do that because that lack of education and that growing aging population only means this is going to be a bigger challenge, right?
Exactly. And, those folks, that caregiver And the person living with dementia needs to continue to have their friends and family surround them. Lois and I both facilitate a number of different support groups, both internally here at Holland Home and then also for the Alzheimer's Association. And we hear that often from caregivers. Wow, so-and-so never calls me anymore. We were such good friends. And ever since, Bill got dementia, I never hear from her. That's a very common refrain.
And some guilt that comes along with that as
Yeah.
well, too.
Yep.
Yeah. We have roughly 11 million informal caregivers. It's an interesting term because there are professional caregivers, but informal caregivers simply because it happened and they're the closest person to that loved one with dementia or Alzheimer's. I think at the same time, the caregiver has to learn a lot as well, too. It's almost like just an immersion in an instant, oh my goodness, as this is happening. I went through this with my sister-in-law and my brother, with him waking up in the middle of the night early, and early on in his diagnosis, unpredictable behavior, typical unpredictable things with, getting dressed and saying, I'm going to work at 4 a.m. and things like that, and really having no idea how to handle that because it was so unpredictable. And this is a part of that education piece, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's very much a part of that education piece. It's knowing what to do in those moments, how to go with that person's flow and recognize that their brain is telling them it's time to go to work. And so being able to communicate by, oh, yeah, you got to get ready for work. Being able to acknowledge that and validate that feeling before trying to, divert or distract. You have to validate that moment that that's where they're coming from because that's what their brain is telling them.
Yeah.
Before you can try to encourage to go back to bed.
Let's talk more about that education piece. And I want to remind our listeners, you're listening to This Day and Age as we're focusing on Alzheimer's disease awareness during Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month, which we could likely say is, of course, for many people, every day of the year. Caregivers, those living with a family member with Alzheimer's or dementia. We're very fortunate to be joined by two dementia specialists, Lois Thomas and Rosemary Apol-Hoezee from the Dementia Institute here in Grand Rapids. So let's talk about that education piece, you guys. This is critically important. Where to start? I have an idea. Rosemary and Lois, you guys have some resources through the Dementia Institute. Probably the first thing Rosemary should say is don't Google too much, right?
Right. Yeah. We do. So we, as Lois had indicated earlier, we do are going to be offering a number of different courses, some for friends and family, caregivers, and also different professionals in the field. We know that people who, drive the emergency response vehicle and sometimes have to go into nursing homes to bring someone to the hospital, they really need the tools so that they can get that person on the stretcher without it being a battle. So we're looking at that. Also really wanting to reach out to clergy and counselors.
Oh my goodness, that's a great point.
Yeah. In fact, Holland Home, we just recently finished a revision of a worship book called Evening Star. In fact, we hope to see it hot off the presses soon and very soon. And it's basically designed to help not only clergy, but also lay people have worshipful moments with people living with dementia.
I love that. I was struck by what you were saying about educating the professionals around us, the clergy, the nurses, the EMTs, as you said, and even the police when somebody wanders away from home and you've got a missing person with Alzheimer's. It is not uncommon now. Once every week or two, you see in the local news this person missing, and there's typically a dementia-related disease as the cause for that. So getting picked off by a police officer or someone in law enforcement, the sheriff deputy, the police officer doesn't typically have that training on how to engage a person living with those diseases.
You're absolutely right. And so being aware of what sort of changes are taking place in the brain when somebody gets dementia, that is huge in terms of informing someone how they're going to just physically approach a person living with dementia, what they're going to say, what sort of physical gestures they're going to use with that person.
This may be one of the hardest things for people to get their head around, but we have two dementia experts with us. So I'm going to ask the question. Take us inside the being of a person living with Alzheimer's. What are they experiencing? And I know this probably changes. I would assume this changes from moment to moment. Maybe periods of joy for 10 minutes, 5 minutes of frustration, 3 minutes of serious sadness. It's a range of emotions I've heard. But just in an everyday existence, if their sleeping is still somewhat normal, they wake up, what does their mind process look like? Lois, can you help us understand? And Rosemary, fill in the gaps, if you will.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They can experience the whole gambit of emotions, and that can change moment to moment. It can change morning to afternoon. It can change day to day. Even just based on how much sleep they are getting, just like you and I, aren't necessarily at our best if we haven't had enough sleep. So that is a huge impact. But they experience vision changes. They experience an inability to comprehend language. They lose 1 out of every 4 words. The brain just doesn't grab it. So they struggle to navigate their world. Sometimes their brain will tell them to go back in time. And so maybe they are the 40-year-old person that needs to get up at 4 a.m. to go to work. And so understanding those emotions behind what they're saying or what they're doing can make all the difference in the world in communicating with them in that moment.
Rosemary, as we're hearing this explained from Lois, I'm curious, is it ever appropriate to ask a person living with dementia or Alzheimer's to say, can you tell me what you're feeling? Or are they not able to express that?
Yeah, I think that can be very appropriate. And again, we know that, individuals vary significantly, but especially if you have a trusting relationship with somebody who has dementia, I think it can be very appropriate to say, how does this feel? Tell me what you're feeling right now. As Lois was talking about brain changes and what the person might be going through, I was reminded of somebody that we heard from at a conference, not last week, but several months ago, and a very well-renowned, very educated, very eloquent woman who had early onset Alzheimer's. And she talked about how she was going to go to a family dinner, and she had to decide beforehand that she was going to eat before she went to the dinner because she could not do both. She could not visit with her family and eat at the same time. So Lois made an allusion to the vision changes, certainly the changes in the ability to comprehend language. So here was somebody who said, I can't do both. I can't eat and socialize at the same time. So I need to concentrate on one when I'm with my friends and family.
Well, and you led me perfectly into what I was going to ask next is we are having this conversation as we approach the holiday season, and really any time of the year can be stressful, but the holidays are stressful enough even if you're not living with a person with Alzheimer's disease or any type of dementia disease. How do we get ourselves ready for that, especially if we are caring for or living with a person with dementia or Alzheimer's? And I'll start with you, Lois. I know there are probably some very simple things you can do, but you're going to visit your parents and a family member with Alzheimer's will be there. How do we prepare for this?
Sometimes it's just simply acknowledging that if you're not the person caring for, but if you're going to be around someone that is caring for, offering that support by, hey, how about you go get some coffee and dessert while I sit with mom for a while. Give that person a little bit of break for a few minutes. And communicating with that person living with dementia, if you're asking them, would you like coffee or tea? It's choices, this or that, versus open-ended questions like, what do you want to drink? Helping communicate with this or that choices. Or maybe you're not sure, would you like coffee or something else? Gives them an opportunity to explore that with you in that moment. If you are the person living or caring for the person living with dementia, sometimes it helps to make a plan ahead of time. Maybe it's, I can't commit to us being there at 3:00 for this gathering, but maybe giving a window. We can be there sometime between 2 and 4. Maybe it's providing an opportunity for the person living with dementia to help. Maybe they can't peel the potatoes anymore, but hey, Dad, could you help me? Help me wash the potatoes. Something that they can do to be involved in the task, to help get them engaged, help them feel successful being a part of it. Make sure you set up the environment for them to be able to be successful in doing that task in that moment. And if all else fails, be okay if the plan that you made didn't work out. Sometimes we have to just let the plans go.
So if you have someone in your family living with dementia, what recommendations do you have to make that, you might be hosting a party, make that gathering more welcoming, more of a receptive place for that family member with dementia? And, this goes beyond the holidays, you guys. And there are birthday parties, gatherings, retirement parties. That can be overwhelming from a sensitive or, just sensory overload, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially around the holidays, people tend to think, well, we've always done this at Christmas. We've always had 50 relatives over here, and sung carols around the Christmas tree. And being able to say, okay, what parts of this are really important for me as the caregiver, and really important for my loved one who has dementia? What parts can we continue to maintain, and what things can we let go? And really focusing on yourself as the caregiver. What can I handle right now, and what can my loved one handle? Because as you indicated, Phil, those occasions tend to be exceedingly stimulating. There's just so much going on. There's noise, there's laughter, there's multiple conversations, there's all sorts of, visual incoming stimuli. And for the person living with dementia, that can be so overwhelming. So really looking at ways to take what we really need of that tradition. We do really want to celebrate that this Christmas, but these other things we can let go.
That's great advice, Rosemary. And Lois, I want to go back to what you said about caregivers, just giving them that right to take a break. Sometimes you have to remind them it's okay to take a break. That's probably very good advice for people listening to us right now. Give that caregiver a break. Even if they're not looking like they need it, they would probably be surprisingly pleased to be offered that. And it can be a small one, or it can be, hey, I'll take Dad for the afternoon. Be willing to make that step forward.
Yeah, and if it's not someone that you've interacted with on a regular basis, then scheduling a time where you and the person that's caring for and the person living with dementia can spend a little bit of time together, and to kind of get everyone acclimated to allow that person who's caregiving to kind of step out, give that familiarity, and to give that respite. And I think the one key point to remember is whether you are the person living with dementia or the person caring for the person living with dementia, we're all just doing the best we can moment to moment, and to remember to give ourselves grace. It's okay to feel some of the feelings that we have. It's okay to feel some frustration. It's okay to need a break. It's okay to need help. It's okay to ask for help.
I think back to when we were in high school or college, and maybe interested in dating and always thinking about that opening line or that pickup line to meet that cute guy or that cute girl, we really could, in an odd sense, use a opening line for a person with Alzheimer's. Can you help us? I know our listeners I would appreciate that. Can you help us as we wrap up this conversation? You meet a relative you haven't seen for a while around the holidays. We're not going to call them pickup lines, but we'll call them opening lines. Are there any good suggestions in terms of opening questions or phrases? Because it's a lot better than just standing there in silence and expecting that person with that dementia disease to start the conversation. Probably more natural, right, Rosemary?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and we do a lot of this training with our caregivers as well. When you approach that person, don't assume that they remember you, and certainly don't say, "You remember me, don't you?" But say, hey, it's Rosemary. Hey, Bill. And then we often encourage our staff, when they're first making that approach with a resident living with dementia, something called a positive personal connection. So if I'm doing that with Lois, and Lois has lovely jewelry on like she always does, I might say, "Hey, Lois, I like your necklace." Again, just a very simple thing with a visual cue. I pointed to my own necklace and then pointed at Lois, and not a lot of words. And again, it's just a good way to make a connection with somebody.
Or it could even be as simple as they're in a room watching Wheel of Fortune, and maybe that was their favorite show, and you can say, "Hey, Uncle Bob, Wheel of Fortune, I love that show." Something maybe like that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yep, there are a lot of really easy ways to just make that connection with someone.
Any final words of wisdom for this journey, a caregiver or the family member with a person with dementia? I'll start with you, Lois.
Absolutely. As I said, give yourself grace. Be okay with letting some things go. And we've got classes that we are offering. You can access them through our website, dementia-institute.org. You'll be able to pick your class times and sign up. We'll be happy to work with you. We also offer individualized consultation slots. So if you have specific questions not answered in this podcast, then you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you.
And no, they're not open to bribes to come into your own home. It's got to be dementia-institute.org. What a true honor to be here with both of you guys.
Thank you.
And this information you have shared. I know our listeners have really appreciated it.
I'll add just one other thing, Phil, for advice for listeners. Avail yourself of a support group. We have support groups that we offer here that are going to be advertised on our website, but the Alzheimer's Association offers a lot of different support groups, and being around other people who have walked or are walking the same journey as you can be so helpful.
Yeah, and some of those support groups are virtual as well as live. So if getting out of the home is just something that's not doable, you can do it via Zoom.
Yep.
Very good reminder. That is a good use for Zoom. She is Lois Thomas. She is a dementia specialist, along with our other guest, Rosemary Apol-Hoezee from the Dementia Institute here in Grand Rapids. And again, that's dementia-institute.org. dementia-institute.org. Please be sure to check that out. I want to thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much.
For having us.
Really have learned a lot. We also want to encourage you to continue to tune in to future episodes of This Day and Age for information on all things aging. And of course, as we've mentioned, be sure to visit thisdayandage.org to catch up on past episodes, including that great episode we mentioned with Teepa Snow. And also, we'd enjoy it if you would subscribe and share this episode and any of our episodes with family and friends so they too can stay informed and make confident decisions as they age. And until next time, for This Day and Age, I'm Phil Tower. Thank you so much for joining us.